I hadn't been back to the Moreland estate in over a year, yet the place looked like something torn from a glossy magazine spread. Every inch gleamed fresh paint on the grand columns, polished marble floors, crystal chandeliers casting golden light across the ballroom. It was the kind of opulence meant to impress the city's oldest families. And it worked. Laughter and polite applause floated over the hum of the string quartet. I stood near the far wall, as far from the spotlight as possible. The beige silk dress Vivian had chosen for me hung stiff against my frame, the fabric cool and unyielding. Understated elegance. She'd called it when she dropped it off at my apartment. I knew what she really meant. Don't stand out. Don't give anyone a reason to remember you were here. Selena moved through the crowd with practiced grace, her hand looped through her husband's arm. They looked like they belonged on the cover of some society wedding issue, all charm and synchronized smiles. I caught her eye once, but she quickly looked past me to greet an alderman's wife. It wasn't anger. Exactly, it was distance, the kind you build brick by brick until it feels permanent. Vivian floated nearby in a silver gown, her voice bright, her laugh sharper than it needed to be. She placed a possessive hand on my father's arm as she spoke to a small group, and I noticed how easily his expression bent to her cues. The same way it had for years, a waiter appeared at my side, offering a champagne flute. I took it without thinking, though I'd barely touched alcohol in months. The glass was cold against my fingers, the pale gold liquid catching the light as if it belonged here more than I did. I stayed near the edge of the crowd, sipping slowly, watching my family hold court in a house that used to feel like mine. The music swelled for the next toast, and I felt the urge to leave the room, to slip into one of the quiet hallways where the noise couldn't follow. I told myself I just needed air, a moment away from the perfect, suffocating picture. I didn't yet realize that a single step out of the ballroom would change everything. I let one of my father's cousins corner me near the dessert table. She was mid-story about her new lake house when it hit subtle at first, just a faint drift in my balance. Then the edges of the room softened, the chandelier lights blurring into hazy halos. I tightened my grip on the champagne flute. Though I hadn't even finished half of it, I'd been careful, sipping slowly, spacing each taste between long pauses. This wasn't alcohol. I knew my body well enough to tell the difference. The cousin's voice faded into the background, the words flattening into sound without meaning. My pulse thudded in my ears. I forced a smile, murmured something about checking on the coat room, and stepped away. The floor felt uneven beneath my heels as I moved through the crowd, careful not to draw attention. My eyes darted once toward Vivian still holding court, laughter bright and flawless as if nothing in the world could shake her. I set the glass down on a passing waiter's tray. The stem slipped from my fingers easier than it should have. The cool air from the hallway beyond the ballroom brushed my skin, and I followed it like a lifeline. The noise dimmed with every step into the back corridor. My breathing slowed, though the odd fog in my head lingered. I told myself it was nothing a skipped lunch, the heat from the crowd, but the thought didn't land. That last sip had tasted slightly bitter, almost metallic. I reached the end of the hall, one hand against the wall for balance, trying to steady myself before anyone saw. The kitchen doors swung open just ahead, releasing a burst of clattering dishes and the smell of butter and herbs. I stepped toward them, hoping for a chair, maybe a glass of water. Instead, someone was waiting for me. The clatter of pans and low hum of kitchen chatter filled the space, a stark contrast to the curated elegance of the ballroom. I barely had time to scan the room before a man stepped away from a stack of folded linens and crossed to me. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with sharp eyes that caught and held mine. His voice was steady, pitched low so it wouldn't carry. Celine Moreland. I hesitated. Yes, I'm Leon Weller, he said. Security for the venue tonight, but years ago. I worked for Moreland and Associates, your mother's firm. Something in my chest tightened at the mention of my mother. But before I could ask, he leaned in slightly, the weight of his words deliberate. "Vivian put something in your drink." I saw it. I stared at him, the kitchen noise dulling to a hum. "What?" She slipped a small capsule out of her clutch, dropped it in, gave it one stir, and it dissolved. Looked like nothing happened, but I've been in this line of work long enough to know what I saw. My pulse quickened. "You're sure I wouldn't be standing here if I wasn't," he said. Then, as if sensing my instinct to run, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card. "If you can, switch glasses. Make it look like an accident, but don't drink from yours again. Whatever's in there. It's not for celebration." I took the card. The embossed letters felt heavier than paper should. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I knew your mother," he said simply, "and she'd want someone watching your back." He didn't wait for me to answer, just gave a short nod and moved toward the service hallway, disappearing into the hum of the kitchen. I stood there, gripping the card, my mind a knot of disbelief and clarity. Leon's words had stripped the party of its pretense. Somewhere in that glittering ballroom, my stepmother was smiling, certain she'd already won. I turned toward the doorway, ready to find my way back. The noise of the ballroom hit me like a wave when I stepped back through the double doors. For a moment, it felt unreal, people laughing, crystal glasses catching the light, the quartet's gentle music wrapping it all in a picture-perfect frame. I tightened my grip on Leon's card in my palm before slipping it into my clutch. Vivian stood across the room, her profile angled toward a photographer. She tilted her head just enough to show the silver earrings that matched her gown. Lips parted in a practiced laugh. My father hovered beside her, beaming at something the man behind the camera had said. My gaze fell to the table in front of them. 2 champagne flutes sat side by side, the stems catching the light. They were nearly identical, down to the fine bubbles clinging to the glass. My own flute, the one Leon had warned me about, waited innocently near my chair. The path between us felt impossibly long, but the crowd gave me cover waiters moving with trays, guests shifting in conversation. I reached my table as if I were simply returning from the restroom, sliding into place without pause. Vivian was still laughing, leaning toward the photographer. I rose again almost immediately, lifting both glasses in one smooth motion, as though I couldn't remember which was mine. My heart thudded in my ears. I set one down in front of my seat, the one I'd taken from Vivian's place, and carried the other to her side. "Here," I said lightly, placing it in front of her. She didn't even glance at me, just murmured a distracted thank you before turning back to the lens. I returned to my seat, resting my hands loosely in my lap. Outwardly, I was calm, composed, another guest enjoying the evening. Inside, my pulse was a drumbeat, each thud counting down to whatever would happen next. I lifted my gaze toward the head table just as my father stood, tapping his glass for attention. The clinking of glassware rippled through the room as my father rose, his hand resting on the back of Vivian's chair. His voice carried with the easy authority of a man used to attention. He spoke about love, loyalty, and legacy, weaving phrases he'd used at every anniversary celebration I could remember. Vivian sat beside him, her posture perfect, her smile fixed. Then, almost deliberately, she reached for the champagne flute I'd placed in front of her. She lifted it with the poise of someone about to seal a performance, her gaze sweeping the room before settling on me. It was the smallest flicker of a smile, confident, certain, that passed over her face before she tilted her head and drank. I held her gaze, not blinking. The toast continued, applause starting around the room, but something in Vivian's expression shifted. Her smile twitched, then froze. The hand holding the glass trembled slightly before the stem slipped from her grip. It hit the floor and shattered, sending golden liquid across the parquet. She swayed once, as if the room had tilted beneath her, and my father's hand darted toward her shoulder before he could steady her. She crumpled. The fall wasn't graceful, her knees hit first, then her side, and she landed in a heap, breath sharp and shallow. The room erupted. Selena pushed past a table of guests, her gown catching on a chair leg. Waiters stumbled with trays. Silverware clattered. Someone shouted for an ambulance. A chorus of voices rose, all layered with confusion and alarm. I stayed in my seat, my hands folded neatly in my lap. My pulse was steady now. I knew exactly what had just happened. That glass had been meant for me. And now, under the bright lights of the ballroom, in front of more than 100 witnesses, Vivian was the one gasping for breath. My father knelt beside her, calling her name, his voice cracking. Selena hovered close, pressing a napkin into Vivian's hand even though it was useless against whatever was in her system. The sound of sirens grew louder outside, a thin wail that cut through the chaos. Red and blue light began to flash against the tall windows as the paramedics approached. The police arrived before the last shard of glass was swept from the floor. Uniformed officers moved through the crowd, guiding guests toward the foyer to take statements. I stayed where I was until a woman in a dark blazer approached, her badge catching the light. "Detective Mara Keene," she said, her tone measured. She took a seat across from me, flipping open a small notebook. Her eyes lingered a second too long on my face, as if searching for something. "You don't seem rattled," she observed. "I process things differently," I replied, keeping my voice even. She asked where I'd been sitting, how close I was to Vivian, whether I'd noticed anything unusual. I answered carefully, neither volunteering nor denying. When she thanked me and moved on, I could feel her watching me even as she spoke to the next guest. The next morning, my phone rang. The number was blocked. "This is Detective Keene," the voice said. "We'd like you to come in. At the station." The walls were the color of wet sand, the air faintly metallic. Keene sat across from me with a folder closed between her hands. "We got the toxicology report," she began. "Scopolamine, small dose, but enough to cause disorientation. Fainting, possible memory loss, in higher amounts. Worse." I met her gaze. "I believe it." Her brow lifted. "You believe it?" "Yes, because I was supposed to drink that glass." The room seemed to pause. "Explain," she said. I told her about Leon Weller, the warning in the kitchen, and how I'd switched the glasses. I didn't dress it up. I let the facts stand. She listened without interruption, her expression unreadable. "That's a serious accusation," she said finally. "If it's true, it changes everything." I leaned back in the chair. "It is true." Her fingers tapped the folder once, then stilled. "Then we'll need more than your word." I already knew where I'd get it. 2 months before the anniversary party, an envelope arrived at my apartment. The return address was from an old brick building in downtown Savannah, my mother's attorney's office. I hadn't heard from them since her estate had been settled, so the sight of their letterhead pulled something tight in my chest. Inside was a single-page letter and a photocopy of a legal document. The letter explained that while reviewing archived files, they'd come across a clause in my parents' prenuptial agreement. I scanned the dense paragraphs until my eyes caught on the part that changed everything if my father remarried. His new spouse would be barred from inheriting anything connected to my mother's assets, her properties, investments, or residual trusts. Those rights would pass directly to me. I read it 3 times, barely breathing. It wasn't just protection. It was a locked door with my mother's name on the key, and Vivian had been standing on the other side for years, assuming the door would open for her. I didn't tell anyone, not at first, but a week later, I made a call to an old family friend, asking questions I thought were private. I should have known better. Conversations in my family never stayed in one place. Soon after, the invitations began. Dinner at the estate, brunch with just the girls, even Selena's anniversary party events I'd been excluded from for years. Vivian started complimenting my clothes, my hair, my poise. It was too much, too sudden, and too obviously rehearsed. She hadn't softened toward me. She'd adjusted her aim. The night of the party, when she handed me that beige dress, she was smiling as though she'd finally decided to let me in. But the truth was sharper than that. Vivian wasn't opening a door, she was building a trap. And by the time I saw it for what it was, I was already standing in the middle of it. Vivian didn't waste time. 3 days after the party, a glossy local lifestyle blog ran an exclusive interview with her. The headline called her a pillar of the community who had been targeted by her troubled stepdaughter. The article quoted her at length how she'd suffered a frightening medical episode, how she'd always tried to welcome me despite my resentment over her marriage to my father. She never mentioned the toxicology report. She never mentioned Leon. And she certainly didn't mention the clause in the prenup. The comments were brutal. People who'd never met me filled the thread with armchair diagnoses, accusing me of jealousy, greed, and worse. It was the kind of public narrative Vivian excelled at: polished, emotional, just believable enough for people who wanted a villain. That evening, my phone rang. Leon's name lit the screen. "I got something," he said without preamble. Pulled the kitchen footage from the security archive before it could be wiped. Within the hour, he was at my apartment with a flash drive. The video was grainy but clear. Vivian standing at the bar, glancing over her shoulder, pulling something from her clutch and dropping it into a glass. One stir, and it vanished. There was more, a clip of her leaning toward a server, whispering something before he hurried off. Leon told me the man hadn't returned after the collapse. No one had been able to contact him. "This isn't just speculation anymore," Leon said. "It's proof." I knew better than to take it to the same outlets Vivian had charmed. Instead, I called a small independent journalist I trusted. I gave her the footage, the timestamps, and Leon's statement. By the next morning, the video was online. No commentary, no sensational headline, just the truth, frame by frame. And within hours, the tide began to turn. By the second day, the video had spread beyond Savannah. The tone of the whispers shifted: less gossip, more condemnation. 2 nonprofit boards quietly removed Vivian's name from their rosters. A boutique she co-owned scrubbed her photo from its website. Her smile, once currency, had turned into a liability. My phone rang late in the afternoon. My father's voice was strained, stripped of the easy warmth he reserved for public moments. "Celine, we need to talk. Tomorrow. At the house." When I arrived, the air inside felt colder than I remembered. Vivian wasn't there. My father sat at the dining table, a folder in front of him. "She's gone," he said. "Left last night. I don't know where. I didn't sit. Here's what I want: a public acknowledgement of the truth. Vivian out of my mother's house, and every asset tied to her estate returned to me without delay." He looked at me for a long moment, then opened the folder. Inside were signed transfer documents, restoring my legal claim to the properties, investments, and trust my mother had built. "You win," he said quietly. "I should have protected you. It wasn't an apology. It was a statement of fact, offered too late to matter." I took the folder, the weight of it solid in my hands. "You could have," I said. His eyes flickered downward. "What happens now is up to you." I didn't answer. I had what I came for, and the rest, how the story would end, was already taking shape. Within a week, the keys to my mother's house were back in my hand. The first thing I did was walk through every room, opening the drapes to let the light in. I pulled family photos from storage and set them back on the mantels where Vivian had replaced them with her own. The garden, choked with weeds under her watch, was cleared and replanted, bit by bit. I returned the house to what it had been, a place that belonged to us, not her. Weeks later, Selena came by. She stood in the doorway, eyes flicking over the restored photographs and the blooming roses outside. She didn't step far inside. Her voice was soft, uncertain. "I don't know what to believe anymore." I didn't argue. Belief was her burden, not mine. After she left, Leon called. She's keeping a low profile. He said, no board seats, no public appearances. The people she counted on aren't returning her calls. I thanked him. He didn't ask for details about what I'd do next, and I didn't offer any. There were no press statements, no interviews. I didn't post triumphant photos or leak new rumors. I let the footage, the documents, and the silence do their work. The damage was already in motion, and nothing I could say would make it sharper. Some victories don't need applause. I sat on the back porch one evening, the scent of fresh soil in the air, and watched the light fade over the garden my mother planted. The house was mine again. But more than that, it was safe. I'd survived. And that, more than any headline or public reckoning, was enough.